The rooster crowed before the light came, its ragged cry breaking the stillness that always felt too large for words. Eliza Miller rose from her straw mattress and sat for a moment at the edge of the bed, her bare feet brushing the cold plank floor. Outside, the dark was soft with fog. She could hear the damp breath of cows in the barn and the slow creak of the windmill turning. It was another morning much like the one before it and the hundreds before that. The Ordnung did not change with the seasons, but Eliza did. She could feel it, quiet and unspoken, a slow stirring beneath her ribs. She dressed by lamplight, fastening her plain blue dress with careful fingers, pinning her white cap beneath her braid. Downstairs, her mother was already moving in the kitchen, the steady rhythm of her work as sure as a clock's. "Morning, Eliza," Mary Miller said softly, kneading dough at the long pine table. "Your father went out to the barn already. The heifer's calving. I'll fetch the milk soon as she's done." Her mother's eyes lifted for a moment. They were pale, gentle eyes, lined at the corners from years of squinting against the sun and smiling through worry. "Take Samuel with you," she said. "He was restless all night again." Restless, the word had become familiar in their house these past months, though no one said it too loudly. Restless meant questions that should not be asked, about why others drove cars, or joined the war in Europe, or talked on telephones strung through wires that hummed in the wind. Restless meant a heart looking over the fence. Eliza found her brother in the barn, his breath clouding in the chill air. He was 17, wiry and serious-eyed, his sleeves rolled to his elbows as he forked hay into the stalls. "She's calving?" Eliza asked, nodding toward the heifer. "She was. A bull calf, strong one. Doll went to fetch the lantern oil." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Train passed before sunrise. Heard it clear this time." Eliza looked up. The faintest whistle echoed over the distant fields. The railroad lay nearly 4 miles east, but the sound carried across the flat Indiana plain like a question that never stopped asking itself. "They run more often now," Samuel said. "Da says it's the new freight route to Chicago. Machinery and steel," he said. "Elise, that's the English world," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "Not ours." Samuel gave a half-smile that wasn't quite a smile. "The English world's giving louder, even here." Before she could answer, the barn door creaked open, and their father stepped inside, bringing a draught of cold morning air with him. Jacob Miller was a tall man with a stillness that filled the space around him. His beard was streaked with gray, his voice low and calm as a prayer. "Enough talk," he said mildly. "We have chores before service." They moved in silence after that, the kind of silence that was not empty but full of every small sound, the hiss of milk into a bucket, the thud of hooves against the packed earth, the murmur of pigeons in the rafters. Eliza found a strange comfort in that rhythm. Yet she could not help glancing now and then toward the eastern horizon, where the fog was lifting in strips of silver and pink. When the morning's work was done, they walked together to the meeting house, a simple white building with no steeple, no cross, just long benches polished smooth by decades of use. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of wood smoke and wool. The men sat on one side, the women on the other. Eliza bowed her head as Bishop Hochstetler began the hymn, the slow rise and fall of the voices like the wind moving over fields of wheat. The words were old German, heavy and solemn. She knew them by heart. "Die Welt vergeht mit ihrer Lust." The world passes away with its desires. Her voice wove quietly among the others. But as she sang, her eyes caught on the small thing, the window, open just a crack. Through it came a drift of sound she should not have noticed, the faint rumble of a distant train, the hiss of its wheels on iron. For a heartbeat, her voice faltered. After service, they lingered outside the meeting house, the air warmer now, the sun breaking free from the haze. The men talked of crops and weather, the women of quilting and canning. A few children chased each other through the grass. It was as it had always been. But then a buggy rattled up from the main road, its horse glossy and restless. At the reins was a man in a brown overcoat, his hat set back on his head, eyes curious and alive. "Eliza," whispered her cousin Ruth, nudging her. "That's the new schoolteacher they were speaking of, the one from Chicago." Eliza turned, startled. "He's come all that way for our little school?" Ruth grinned. "They say he's a university man, knows Latin and poetry. Imagine." Eliza tried to imagine, but found it difficult. The man, Thomas Hale, as she would soon learn, was greeting the bishop with a handshake, smiling with an ease that seemed almost foreign here. He spoke quickly, words tumbling out like pebbles in a stream. His manner was polite, but his eyes were restless, darting over the faces of the gathered Amish as if he were cataloging a different species. For a moment, his gaze met Eliza's. Not directly, he was too careful for that, but long enough that she felt her breath pause. Then he looked away, and she told herself it had meant nothing. That evening, after supper, the Millers sat by lamplight. Jacob read from the scriptures, his voice deep and steady. Mary mended a torn sleeve. Samuel, unusually quiet, whittled a small piece of wood, his eyes distant. When the reading ended, Eliza rose to clear the dishes, but her father's voice stopped her. "Eliza," he said softly, "you looked uneasy at service." She hesitated. "It was nothing, Da." He studied her a moment. "The world outside is changing. Trains, teachers, talk of war. But the Lord does not change. Do you understand?" "Yes, Da." His gaze lingered, as if he could see something in her she did not yet see herself. "Keep your heart quiet, Doctor. That is the only safety left to us." She nodded, but as she washed the dishes in the cool water, she couldn't help glancing toward the window. Beyond the dark fields, a thin plume of smoke rose on the horizon, the late freight train, its engine pulsing red against the dusk. She could almost hear the rhythm of it, steady, endless, calling. And in that moment, Eliza Miller knew two things she could not say aloud: that she loved her life and her faith with a fierce tenderness, and that something within her had begun to move, quiet but unstoppable, like the wheel of a train far away.
The next morning dawned bright and sharp, the kind of late summer light that made every blade of grass gleam. The sky above the Miller farm was pale as washed linen, and a cool breeze carried the smell of cut hay from the neighboring fields. Eliza moved through her chores quickly, her thoughts distracted. The rhythm of milking, churning, sweeping, tasks she could perform with her eyes closed, no longer settled her mind as they once had. Every so often her gaze drifted to the narrow dirt road that wound past their property toward town. The new schoolteacher was due to start that morning. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of English territory, a squat red building with white-trimmed windows. The Amish children attended through 8th grade, studying only what their community permitted: reading, arithmetic, scripture, and a bit of history. The previous teacher, Miss Krause, had married and moved away. The bishop had agreed to let the county board assign a replacement, though not without reluctance. Eliza told herself she had no reason to wonder what sort of man he was. But curiosity was a subtle thing. It slipped in through cracks one didn't know were there. By midday, she had reason enough to visit. Her mother had promised to sell a basket of eggs to Mrs. Halpern, who lived near the schoolhouse. Eliza volunteered for the errand before her mother could even finish asking. She set out with her bonnet tied tight under her chin, the basket swinging lightly from her arm. The fields shimmered in the heat, rows of corn whispering as she passed. A pair of larks darted overhead. She kept her pace steady, though her heart seemed oddly quick. The sound reached her before the sight did. The murmur of children reciting, then laughter, an unfamiliar sort, loud and unrestrained. When she reached the small yard, she paused at the fence. Through the open window, she saw him. Thomas Hale stood before the blackboard, sleeves rolled past his elbows, chalk dust pale against his vest. His hair, sun-browned and a little unkempt, caught the light each time he turned. "Who can tell me what this means?" he asked, tapping a word written on the board. A dozen small hands shot up. Eliza couldn't make out the word, but she saw the children smiling, eager. This sight was strange to her. In Amish teaching, learning was quiet, solemn, like a form of worship. This laughter, this movement felt like something alive. She turned away quickly, embarrassed by her own watching. She reminded herself she had eggs to deliver, not time to linger like some curious girl from the English farms. But as she started down the road again, a voice called after her. "Miss, wait a moment!" She stopped, startled, as Thomas Hale came out the door, wiping chalk from his hands. "I beg your pardon," he said, slightly out of breath. "You dropped something." He held out her handkerchief. It must have slipped from her pocket. Eliza's cheeks warmed. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, taking it from him. "Sir," he smiled faintly, "that makes me feel about 40. Thomas Hale will do." She hesitated, glancing toward the children inside. "I should not keep you from your class." "They're practicing sums. I think they can survive 5 minutes without me." His tone was easy, unguarded. Eliza found herself unsure how to respond. Among her people, men and women spoke carefully, their words measured like ingredients in a recipe. But Thomas's sentences ran free, unbound by the quiet spaces she was used to. "Do you live nearby?" he asked. She nodded. "Our farm is 2 miles north. The Millers." "Ah," he said, recognition dawning. "Your father brought butter to the school board meeting last week. Excellent butter, if you'll forgive the intrusion of an outsider's opinion." Eliza's lips curved before she could stop them. "Dad would be pleased you think so." He studied her for a moment, not boldly, but with genuine interest. "I've read about the Amish, but reading about something isn't the same as living beside it. You keep to yourselves mostly." "It is our way," she said. "And does that make you happy?" The question caught her off guard. "Happiness is not the measure," she answered after a pause. "Faith is." He nodded slowly, as though turning the words over. "I suppose that's why I'm here, to learn what that means. In my world, people chase happiness like a prize and end up more lost than before." Before she could reply, a boy inside shouted, "Mr. Hale, the chalk broke!" And Thomas laughed, the sound rich and untroubled. "I should go," she said quickly. "Of course." He stepped back, tipping his hat in a courteous gesture that somehow didn't feel mocking. "Thank you for indulging a stranger's curiosity, Miss Miller." Eliza turned, walking quickly down the road, her heart thudding in a way she couldn't name. The sun was high now, the air thick with heat. She kept her eyes on the path, telling herself she had done nothing wrong. Still, when she reached Mrs. Halpern and handed over the eggs, her thoughts were not on the exchange, but on a man's voice saying, "Does that make you happy?" That evening, Samuel came in late from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat. Their father frowned. "You were gone long." "I stopped by town," Samuel said. "They're hiring at the grain mill, good wages." Jacob Miller's eyes hardened. "You will not work among the English." Samuel looked down, jaw tight. "I was only asking." "You were listening to temptation." The room went quiet. Eliza felt the tension like a wire drawn too tight. Her father's voice softened, but the firmness remained. "The world beyond our fields grows loud, Samuel. but we are not called to its noise." Samuel nodded stiffly and went upstairs without another word. Later, when the lamps were out and the house lay still, Eliza sat by her small window watching the moon rise over the cornfields. The distant whistle of a train drifted across the night, faint and lonely. Somewhere beyond those tracks, men like Thomas Hale built cities of iron and light, fought wars, wrote poems, lived lives she could hardly imagine. She told herself she did not envy them, and yet, as the sound faded into silence, she found herself whispering his question under her breath. "Does that make you happy?" The words hung in the dark, unanswered.